Good Saturday morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Live Tech series here at Baxter's Garage and Pro Twin Performance. I'm Kevin Baxter. Thanks a million for jumping in and joining us this morning. We've got several members already in already. Isaac, you're in the middle of a shooting competition. That's kind of cool, man. So you've got one eye down a scope and one eye on your phone watching us. That's pretty awesome. So before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to three of our newest channel members, Jim Laurie, Isaac Temple, and Matthew Albertson. Guys, I really appreciate you supporting the channel, of course, with your membership. And then, of course, you guys simply buying parts from us helps us to do videos like this. And you know, I'll be honest, when we reach out to a manufacturer that we believe in and that we trust, and they take the time to come on this show and educate you guys about their product line, I think that says a tremendous amount about what that manufacturer puts into their product and what also they will do after the sale if, in fact, there was ever an issue. So this type of stuff is really important. So before you make a buying decision, you know, keep in mind when you see this type of stuff. Also, after the video, if you would, or even during the video if you like, you can hop over to our website. We've got all of Legend suspensions uploaded there, so you can read a bit more there. And of course, send us an email if you have any other questions. We are going to be watching live chat as well. And so we'll see all the questions. So I hope you guys brought those in, and we do appreciate it. So I think we've got Eric ready to go. Let's check on him here. Yeah, he's ready to party. Let's patch Eric in. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm good. How are you this morning, Kevin?
Man, I'm doing great, pal. It's I admit it was a late night last night. I'm going to try not to fall asleep on you. I was rebuilding a carburetor on a 36 Ford on my kitchen table last night, and at midnight, 1 o'clock, I was putting that carburetor on that 36 Ford. So
nice.
Anyway, well, you know, we live and breathe this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit about yourself. I know you're kind of into dirt track racing. You got a bunch of hobbies, things like that, man. What kind of stuff do you like doing, and how did you get in the business?
That's a great question, Kevin. So, quite honestly, when I got in the business, I've actually been in the business for 25 years,
Wow.
in various capacities. When I graduated from high school, I joined the National Guard, and
Awesome.
Of course, when I got out of basic training in AIT, I had just got home, and the local dealership here in town, which is a Yamaha, BMW, Suzuki dealership, had just taken on another franchise, and they were looking for somebody to help put some bikes and ATVs together. And they said, "Hey, you interested in a job, but it's probably only a 30 or 45-day job."
Right.
And I got to the end of that, and they said, "We like your work ethic and what you do, and if you want a job, you're more than welcome to stick around." And so I worked there for virtually 20 years. And then Jesse came to me and said, "Hey, I'd really love to have you come out here and work for me." And it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. To work for a manufacturer and a company like Legend Suspensions, virtually 5 miles down the road from where I live, here in my hometown.
That works.
It was too good of an opportunity to pass up. So yes, 25 years later, here I am still, and love every minute of it.
Excellent. Now, Jesse started the company back in '98, I think it was, right? With the air ride for soft tail suspensions, what started it all, right?
That is correct. Yeah, he had a brainchild idea that, like, he wanted to build this air ride, and he basically worked on it in his mom and dad's basement. Right. And that's where it started. And the evolution of the company from that idea in his mom and dad's basement to where it is today it's a pretty remarkable story. So
yeah, no kidding. I mean, I've watched, you know, I've been doing this a long time too, right? And I always watch companies of how they continuously are, you know, pumping money and time and effort into R&D. They're constantly innovating, constantly coming out with new products. And you guys have done that over the years, man, and that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, if you look through our archives and the history of the company and look at the generation one shocks to where we're at today and the evolution of the product, it's amazing. And as you stated, as far as pumping the money and the R&D into this this program, that's one of the things that we really never rest on our laurels on. I mean, we've got shock dynos and durability testers and you name it, and it's something that those machines are running, weekly, trying, it may be something as small as a small internal change to maybe a different oil or oil weight, something. We're always looking for the next best thing. So it's evolution. It never stops.
Well, and it's, suspension, I understand what you guys go through. I mean, it's kind of like engine building, right? It's an incredibly competitive product category. The price ranges are all over the place. I did the video on the engine blueprinting a while back, to try to help people understand, you don't always get what you pay for. That's why you do business with a manufacturer you trust. But, there are reasons why there are significant price differences, features and benefits for each price, right? I mean, you guys have a pretty broad price range with shocks and fork kits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and one of the things that, to kind of caveat off of that, like you said, Kevin, I mean, there's a broad range of pricing, and no different than what, like you said, as far as building an engine, there's good, better, and best. And even your good build, you're not sacrificing the quality or the durability. It's just, maybe not going to have quite as much horsepower, quite as much torque. In our case, maybe doesn't have quite as many adjustability features, but still offers you such an upgrade that over stock that you're going to know right away as soon as you bolt it on.
Yeah, and in sometimes, and we face that same explanation on our engine stuff. I mean, just because it may be a lower price build doesn't mean it's any less quality. It just may not have, as many features and benefits and things like that of something that would be more expensive, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So I would say one of our challenges when we're building bikes, things like that, is we try to get people to focus on the entire motorcycle, right? We'll make big performance enhancements, but suspension seems to be forgotten about. And I look at it. I have 4 key points when we look at designing a bike. I'm looking at fit, form, function, and safety.
Yep.
Does the bike physically fit the rider? Form, does it look good? Then how well does it function, and how safe is it? And I see many people complaining about uneven tire wear, for example, yet the suspension is absolutely horrible on the bike. So you've got it's a whole system, right? I mean, everything has to work together. So I guess I would say, let's give you the floor. I mean, let's, I've got a set of your Coil Overs here.
Sure.
And of course, you guys offer a light duty, you offer a heavy duty, you've got more applications and part numbers than I think I've seen from any manufacturer in the shock line of things. So let's start with, I guess, Coil Overs and work our way up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, excuse me, just like you were saying, Kevin, there's a broad range, and one of the things that, like you were saying, as far as looking at a total concept of a motorcycle, the functionality of it is huge, just because so many guys get real target focused on building a big motor. They want to build big horsepower, but the last thing on their mind is how do they make the thing stop and how do they make it handle, until they go out and they have one of those moments where it tries to buck them off, or they can't get it slowed down. And so as a complete package, between engine and chassis and brakes and suspension, that's one of the big spots where we focus on. Every single bike that we have in the shop here,
right,
is focused on that, complete bike package. So to kind of start off with where we're at and the product lines that we offer, our first product line, our base model, our standard Revo, is basically available in 3 lengths, depending on model application, 12, 13, and 14 inch. That is what we consider a standard rate damper. So basically the only adjustability you have on that shock is the coil. And that is the most critical adjustment on any of our shocks, is making sure that the spring rate is set correctly for the rider. If the spring rate isn't set correctly for the rider, they potentially don't have enough sag or too much sag, changes chassis balances, weight biases front to rear. So that, like going back to that, the spring rate and the spring adjustment is the most critical adjustment. Well, on the standard Revo, that is what you have.
Right.
And from there, we go to our Revo A, which is the shock you have in your hand there with the rebound adjustable damper. And that rebound adjustment is just a second tuning device. And, it's not intended to compensate for weight or compensate for, a second passenger. A lot of guys think that if they just make an adjustment on that knob, that they can put their wife or their significant other on the bike, and they don't need to make any of those adjustments. But what that rebound adjustment knob is doing is it's controlling how fast or slow the shock returns back to extended length. And it's more of a seat of the pants adjustment as far as what you may feel or what the next guy may feel is comfortable for them, whether it's from a performance standpoint or from a comfort standpoint.
Now, I don't see, I don't see any notches, what you would typically see on a coil over for, running a spanner wrench to adjust it. So
yep.
You can actually dial this in by hand, right?
Correct. Yeah, it is a toolless adjustment. When the shock is mounted on the bike, essentially what you do is you grab the spring and completely just grab the spring with both hands and turn it. The spring is actually pinned into the lower spring seat on that shock.
Yep.
And if you look at the base of that spring seat, or at the base of that spring, you'll see a small little pock mark where that pin is welded in there.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And then we always, when we actually assemble the shocks, they're all assembled with the Legend logo on the spring facing outwards. And we use that as our reference when we're counting turns, to make those adjustments, because we want equal adjustments made left to right. So bolted on the bike, you can take and physically grab the spring, turn it up or down the body by hand. And then, we always go back to a sag measurement rather than, asking, or we get a lot of people that ask, how many turns should I put for, I weigh 225 pounds. Since everybody is different, we always refer to a sag adjustment or a sag measurement.
So like, a half inch, 1 inch, something like that typically?
So the general rule of thumb in the suspension industry is 1/3 of your total travel should be set as rider sag. And so like on our 13-inch shock, it has 3 inches of travel. We shoot for 1 inch of sag. And since we know the hard numbers on that shock, that 13-inch shock with the amount of travel it has, we always shoot for a target measurement of 12 inches with the rider and passenger sitting on the bike. If that was our 12-inch shock, we would go to about 1/2 to 5/8 of an inch of sag. And so we'd be shooting for a target measurement of 11.5 to 11 3/8 eye to eye or center to center on that shock when set correctly for rider or passenger weight.
Okay, now I noticed in pretty much all your shocks you have a standard duty and a heavy duty, right? So that's basically different springs.
Correct.
That's the idea. But you would still set your sag the same, and you let the spring rate do the work. I know there's a lot of confusion on that. People, if they put more weight on it, they just tighten down more on the spring, and that's not right.
Not necessarily. And so, like you had mentioned, we have a couple of different standards as far as where we classify going from a standard to a heavy duty spring. And in the most popular segment, in the touring segment, of course, 500 pounds of combined rider, passenger, and luggage weight is that threshold. If you exceed that or you're bumping up against it, then we always recommend going to the heavy duty. But for the majority of the average riders, especially guys or gals riding solo, the standard rate spring is everything they need.
I've always found that interesting. If you flip open an HD owner's manual to look at the weight capacity of, say, an Ultra Classic, right? And you add, I'll say, your average rider, passenger, full saddlebags, and maybe a couple of things in the tour pack, you exceed the weight rating of the bike right out of the gate.
That's a fact.
So I've always thought that was kind of funny thing. It's ride to eat and eat to ride, right?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that a lot of guys, I think, are kind of oblivious to, but more and more people are coming around to it after, this whole industry, of course, no different than whether you're doing engines or whatnot. There's a bit of a snowball effect for sure, but all it usually takes is one or two guys to put a set of these shocks on the back of their bike and get them adjusted in. And next thing you know, their buddies are like, whatever you've got, I want. But going back to your little conversation there on the stock Harley shocks, one of the big things that most people don't realize is how drastically oversprung they are for average riders. Just like you said, if you open the owner's manual, it says if you're under 200 pounds, set the preload adjuster to this setting. Well, I can testify to that. I weigh 185, 190 pounds, dressed and ready to ride, and sit on a new road glide or a new street glide, something with a 12-inch shock, and I can maybe move the rear suspension 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. And if that was our shocks on there set correctly, that thing would move a 1/2 inch, and that really lets you know that the shock is working with you instead of against you. And so once guys put a set of these on, that's usually the eye-opening experience that starts it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, just looking at it, I'm an engineer kind of guy, right?
Yep.
So I'm looking at the quality too, and I mean, this is all billet stuff. You've got spherical bearings instead of just your typical bushing on either end, and those pretty much last forever. I mean, this is really a well-made piece, even down to the cushion down at the bottom. I mean, it's a nice unit.
Yeah.
So when you go from this to the next step up, I mean, you see, of course, like remote reservoir stuff looks killer. It looks awesome. And then you've got the piggyback stuff. But this is where you've got the entry level of these. Then you have the rebound adjuster. Then there's a big jump into the piggyback and remote reservoir stuff. So I know we get to the point that you can really dial in a suspension. You've got compression, preload, rebound, all these aspects of it. So walk us through the next level and explain why those are so much more than these.
Sure. All right. So I've got an example here. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is, of course, an example of our Revo arc in a piggyback for a Dyna FXR Sportster. And,
man, that would look great. That would look great on my parts counter.
Well, you know what? we have this really cool billet display stand that we could probably get on your parts counter.
Excellent.
And then here's our Revo arc remote reservoir for the FL touring models. And a lot of guys are asking about why didn't you do a piggyback for the FL touring models? But there's not enough saddlebag relief on the backside for the piggyback to actually clear the backside of the bag. And so that's why we chose to go with the remote reservoirs and offer a couple different mounting options here. But going into the details of those shocks, starting, like you said, with the construction, no different. And this also will actually give you an idea of the value of the standard Revo. No different than you were saying, 6061 billet aluminum, basically CNC machined. That's exactly what we do with those standard Revos at a $725 retail price point. So those aren't giving up. You're not giving up quality for a lesser dollar product. But 6061 billet aluminum, CNC machine bodies. This one, no tube construction versus a twin tube construction on our Revos, which means that the internals are totally different. To go along with that, the Revo Arc is also a nitrogen charged shock. And so what happens is as the oil is being transferred inside the shock and back and forth between the remote reservoir chamber or the piggyback, it's very, very quick responding because of the nitrogen pressure that's in there. Whenever that shock compresses, it's actually putting pressure against that nitrogen bladder and sending it back the other way. So very responsive, very quick, to respond to any impurities in the road or, different conditions, whether it's road conditions or riding styles. And then to go along with that, like you said, compression and rebound adjustability. We've taken a little different approach on how we've set those up. There's no denying the fact that there's some other manufacturers and competitors out there that are advertising more adjustability than we do. But the reason that we've tried to keep it as simple as we have is, let's face it, we're all, natures of the beast here. Sometimes we think that more adjustability is better, but instead of having 21 to 24 clicks of adjustment on rebound and 21 to 24 clicks of adjustment on compression, we basically open the range up more or wider. So instead of having 21 to 24 clicks, we've got 7. Sure. Because let's face it, most of us aren't going to feel the difference of 1 or 2 clicks on a shock.
Well, yeah, 24. I mean, we're not riding around Laguna Seca, right?
Exactly.
So, and I see the same thing on exhaust, man. I get the question all the time, which exhaust is better? And it kind of comes down to the point there that, if it's in a similar product family, the average rider, 99% of the people out there will never notice or feel the difference. So having an extremely finite adjustment, we're not, suspension physicists and all that type of stuff. We just need enough to dial it in.
Yes.
Just enough, right?
And that's one thing that we've always taken that approach is you don't need to have a degree in mechanical engineering and fluid dynamics and stuff like that to install and tune a set of our shocks. Because like you said, 1 click of adjustment on this is, it's a wider range of adjustability. And so quite honestly, you can tune this shock a lot easier with a matter of a couple clicks because you're opening it up or closing it even further per click. But you can put a set of these on and tune them for long range comfort. If you know that you're just going to cruise down the road and you're going to do a 500 miles or 800 miles in a straight line.
Right.
Take and open up the compression adjustment, open up your rebound a little bit, let that shock really soak up everything that you throw at it with it at as much ease as you can. But then when you get to where you're going, say your destination is Tennessee and you're going to go ride the tail of the dragon, the next morning you get up and you get ready to leave the hotel or the campground, you take and you close that compression adjustment up, close the rebound adjustment up, and then it takes that shock that was comfortable on the trip there. Mm-hmm. And gives you a performance shock and a performance feel to go, scrape the floorboards off your motorcycle.
Right. Well, and to me, the reason the adjustments are so important, and when we do these hot rod engines for guys, that I try to explain, suspension's doing several things. Obviously, it's keeping the tire on the road. It's giving you a nice, comfortable ride. But, people need to understand that as performance increases, I mean, the belt, it's constantly trying to pull the swing arm either up or pull the swing arm down. So as you add more power, obviously, those forces increase, mm-hmm. right? So having that rebound adjustment as well aids in traction and safety considerably, right?
Absolutely. And to go along with that, especially if you're riding nice twisty canyon roads or, not only do you have the force of the belt trying to pull or push the swing arm up or down as you're accelerating and decelerating, but then you also have the load on the chassis as you're cornering and leaning the bike over. And So then you've got the spherical bearings in the shocks, which basically take any bind out of that suspension as it's traveling through its range of motion, rather being solid mounted on hard bushings. So there's a ton of features and benefits, and like I said, it really expands from our cheap, our 725 Rebo all the way up to our $1,400 Rebo Arc. There's a ton of those same features that are shared across the line.
Now you showed an arc a second ago, right? Can you go through all the actual adjustments and what they really do, what all this stuff means?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wished I would have grabbed one that wasn't mounted on a display stand here. But so on the Rebo Arc, on the top of the piggyback here, or on our remote reservoir, the larger knob down at the base or on the top of the remote reservoir canister, that's your compression adjuster. And so the way I always try to put it into layman's terms is rightsy tightsy, leftsy loosey. You turn your compression adjuster in all the way till it bottoms, not trying to turn it past that, but bottoming and then backing it out to the first click. That's going to basically slow your compression adjustment up, or your compression travel through that shock. And then as you open it up, it's going to basically let the shock compress easier. So rightsy tightsy is going to give you a tighter, firmer ride. Leftsy loosey, you're going to open that thing up and it's going to give you a lot more plush, comfortable ride.
Now, this is where a lot of confusion that people have when I talk to them. They and I try to break it down just like you just did. So, obviously you've got to choose the correct spring for the application, right? Yep. So that's step one. Step two, adjusting the sag, which takes care of, your preload essentially, right?
Yep.
Then you move into compression, which is more about the speed at which the shock compresses. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah, because I've seen some people, they'll dial in and really tighten up the compression when what they should be doing is setting sag.
Adjusting the spring.
Yeah,
exactly.
Adjusting the spring. Okay.
Let's face it, like I say, we're all natures of the beast here, and we all want that easy button.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes people think, oh, if I just make a couple of small adjustments here, I won't have to adjust that spring. And like I said, the spring adjustment on any of our shocks is absolutely the most critical, because that's truly what's setting that suspension to compensate for your weight, the weight of the bike, the weight of the passenger. And like you said, then when we go to the compression and the rebound adjustments, those are the finite adjustments. Those are seat of the pants, how you really want to tune that suspension in to fit you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you have a rebound adjustment, right? And that's the same sort of thing, just the speed at which the shock extends, right?
Exactly. I don't know if you can see that on this. It's kind of a tough look here, but at the base of the shock, there's a small billet adjuster right down here. Same concept. Basically, you turn it all the way in, which is going to seat that, back it out to the first click. That is actually going to give you the slowest rebound rate. So it's going to make that shock feel much tighter. It's almost going to tie it down, per se. As you open the rebound adjuster up, it's going to let the shock float a little bit more. It's going to create a quicker, more responsive rebound. And so it also is, like some people will say, I don't understand what you're saying. It's really essentially controlling the pogo stick effect of the shock.
Okay.
We've all bounced on pogo sticks when we were growing up. A pogo stick doesn't have
not successfully.
Right. Pogo sticks don't have any damping.
Right.
They're just a spring on a post, and the harder you bounce on it, usually the quicker and the higher it sends you in the air. That's what your rebound is controlling, is how fast that thing kicks back and how high it kicks you back. So a lot of guys will get that sensation, especially on the stock shocks, that it's trying to kick them out of the saddle.
Right.
And it's just because I don't think there's enough control there personally.
Right. So to help people, we're asking them to spend in your highest end shock, we're asking them to spend $1,400. All right. So before a guy does that, I would want him to make absolutely certain he fully understands what each adjustment does, so he can get the most out of it. Right. So if a guy bought a set of those, first thing he does, put on his riding gear, his passenger load the bike as he typically would, set on the bike, and measure the sag, right? That's going to
Yep.
tell him how to adjust the spring. From there, he pretty much, he could maybe write down the number of turns or something and then do it with himself solo with the bike unloaded. Then he knows the number of turns, so he can grab it and make a quick adjustment, right? Or set it in the middle and find a happy medium, right?
Right.
So then what are the riding characteristics that tell a rider how to and when to adjust that compression and rebound? What will the bike feel like? What would they experience? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that is a question that we get quite often, and quite honestly, what our standard response is to that, you hit the nail on the head perfectly, as far as to start with making sure the spring is set correctly for their weight, and even determining which spring rate they need. We're all guilty of it. When somebody asks you, how much do you weigh? When we ask a customer, how much do they weigh? Everybody says, well, I'll take myself, for example. I weigh 175 pounds. That's 175 pounds when I get out of the shower.
Hey, man, you weighed 185 pounds a few minutes ago.
Exactly. I weigh 175 when I get out of the shower.
There you go.
By the time I'm ready to go ride and I've got boots, jacket, helmet, gloves, I'm probably 185 to 190. We always kind of sell ourselves short on that, but it's a feel good, placebo effect when you say, I only weigh 175. But like you said, when guys set the dealers, or even us, when we're, either at a show or say during the Sturgis Rally, when we're setting them up, just like you said, what we would do, we would start off with just the rider, solo rider, have him sit on the bike, and we're going to make that spring adjustment until we attain our target measurement for the length of the shock. So we know that we've got the proper sag. And then we would have their passenger get on, husband or wife or girlfriend or whatever, have them jump on the bike, and we're going to go back and we're going to say, all right, this is your baseline solo. We're going to go through the whole adjustment procedure again, and we're going to get to that same target measurement with the passenger on there. And, we'll cue them in and say, all right, we added 7 turns per spring. Some guys will ask us to draw a mark on their shock as far as, here's your baseline, here's your 2-up line. So that's the second thing right there. And then to go back to your question on compression and rebound, whether it's our Revo A with just the rebound adjuster, or if a guy put on a set of Revo arcs, what we always recommend is, we tell guys, take your saddlebags off and go ride that same stretch of road that you'd ride every day to and from the house or to and from work. We all know those roads like the back of our hands. We could drive them or ride them blindfolded because it's something that we take every day. And that's a good start to establishing a baseline, because, and what we'll do on the Revo A's, we always start number 3 on the rebound adjuster. Revo arcs, we'll go 3 on compression, or 4 on compression, 3 on rebound, and basically start there. And we'll tell guys, go ride that same stretch road, make a loop, come back, and then go one click further open on compression, 1 click open on rebound. Go ride that same loop. If it feels worse, you went the wrong way.
Well, and what I tell people to look out for, find that set of, where road has a bit of a hill like that. So the idea is to dial it just to the point that you no longer feel that weightlessness effect.
Yep.
Right? And you don't want to feel like when it settles all the way, like you're bouncing, right? So it should absorb it all the way through, and it's working it back and forth. So that would be the thing to do, right?
Truly. The thing that people have to remember, all you guys out there, everybody has their own perception of comfort or perception of performance. And we could take and get 5 guys in the room, and we could all sit down and start talking about riding our 13-inch Rebo A on the back of their road glides. And chances are between 10 guys, there's going to be, probably 3 that like one setting. There's going to be 2 that like another. And when guys start comparing stories, it's like, I like 3. Well, I like 5. I like 2, and if the next guy is like, man, if he likes 5, maybe I should try that. And he goes and puts his on 5 and goes, man, I don't really like that. So it's, do you like chocolate or do you like vanilla?
That's why Baskin Robbins has 31 flavors, man.
Right.
All right. Well, let me jump to some questions here. Actually, one of our members, Max Akins, is actually in the shop working on a set of forks right now.
Okay.
Good to know. JF Kansas asks us, a jump from 12-inch to 13-inch seems extreme, or is it not once you get it adjusted? I think that's more about lean angle and you put a taller shock, you want more lean angle, all that type stuff. Purpose built shock, right?
Yeah, I'd actually like to interject on that one for a second, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
Because that is probably one of the top 5 questions that we get. 12 or 13? Why should I go with the 13? 95% of the time, if not maybe 98% of the time, when we get that question, especially guys riding baggers, we try to point them in the direction of the 13. And some guys will get a little skeptical. They'll get a little nervous because they don't want to increase the ride height of the motorcycle. They feel that they're not comfortable thinking that they're going to be on their tippy toes. But going back to what I was saying on our Sag measurements or Sag setting, that 13-inch shock, when set correctly for rider weight or rider and passenger weight, we basically want that shock to compress 1 inch. And so it's going to, our Sag 1 inch with their weight on it. So that 13-inch shock is actually going to sit at 12 inches eye to eye. And guys will say, well, is it that big of a difference in the ride? And it really is, because the 13-inch shock has an extra inch of travel over the 12. 1 inch doesn't sound like much, but when you start looking at percentages, it's substantial. Yeah. And when you're going from 2 inches of travel to 3 inches of travel. So that's a big one there. And that's the reason why Harley put 13s on all the ultras,
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah.
One other thing that JF Kansas said is, how mad will a girl be when she wants to ride, but you've got to crank down on the springs for her first? So Ron Coburn says, I can tell people one thing: spend the extra money to get the good shocks, because you'll kick yourself in the butt if you don't. Yeah. Right? Spend it once and get it done. Smoother, Anthony Goodrich. It's got to be a lot smoother having those adjustments. Yes, absolutely. I've got one guy, Jim Laurie, says a brother has had the Legend Axio front suspension installed on his 2016 Lowrider S. They could not adjust it properly. 2 mechanics have tried, but it still rides like a jackhammer. So that's the pogo stick thing we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Have any suggestions for him?
Honestly,
watch this video, and when we get to forks, we'll tell him how to adjust it.
That's right. There's a multitude of small tips and tricks that I could go over there. The best would probably be to have his brother or brother-in-law contact us at service at Legend Suspensions, and we can walk him through the long list of different tips and tricks that we've got there.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's talk about front ends. Man, I got to tell you, when I started putting all your part numbers in my website, good Lord, dude, you guys have front end applications like crazy. Specific applications for 21-inch wheel, 23-inch wheel, stock length, 2-inch over. I mean, a ton of stuff there. So walk us through all of that.
That is a pretty long list for sure. So kind of going back to the beginning on our front suspensions, we had found so much success with the Revo A's when we came out with those. Well, Revo and Revo A's, 5-6 years ago that guys were getting the rears dialed in, and then they were pounding on the door for front ends because they're like the back end is so good, the front end feels like it's 40 years behind, you know. And so we went to work on front ends to match up to our rears. And what we settled on was, like you said, our Axo cartridges, and it's a very, very cool design in the regards of it's a twin chamber design, and it uses an oil chamber, conventional oil piston and shim stack to control the damping effect. But then it also has a nitrogen chamber in that cartridge as well, which really controls your brake dive and your a lot of your anti-bottoming effects and such, and really just brings balance back to the chassis. You know, the one thing that we always look at is 80% of your comfort comes from the rear suspension, where 80% of your performance and handling comes from the front suspension.
Oh, and that's brake dive. That's a big thing, man. That's the safety deal. And anytime I do a front end for somebody, I warn them brakes are going to be a little touchy, and the difference it makes is unbelievable, just in braking, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's one of the biggest key features and benefits that we advertise on those front end kits is reduced brake dive, up to a 40% reduction in your front brake dive, which gives you the confidence to reach up and grab the front brakes. So many riders are scared to grab their front brakes because it feels like they're going to tuck the front wheel out of sight.
Right.
And so whether it's that panic stop situation where somebody pulls out in front of you, or you've got some sort of wildlife running across the road in front of you, and there's no choice but to dynamite the brakes, the control and the confidence that front end gives you once you've experienced it, it's a totally ride changing experience.
Right.
We spent a lot of time and effort on those front ends, and like you said, going back to our range of fitments, we do have the standard length and the 1 inch lowered for the majority of the baggers, anywhere from 97 up through to 2020. What we always recommend, 9 times out of 10, guys that are running a stock front wheel size, stock tire size, stick with the standard length. The 1 inch lowered is really for that when that rider is 5'4" and needs every extra half inch that they can get to get their feet on the ground and more comfortably planted and that confidence. So if you got yourself, if you got guys coming in and asking about the front ends, or if you've got the guys that are listening, if you're considering, I would stick with the standard length front end. Just for that reason, that's going to give you the standard length, the standard travel lengths and such. So everything stays very consistent. And like I say, it keeps the same weight bias front to rear. So the balance of the chassis is really good. Bouncing into some of those other applications, 21 and 23s. So as most guys will see, the Axo 21, specifically for 21 inch front wheel applications, and the 23 as well. And what those kits really entail is they're actually a standard length kit as far as our total travel lengths in those kits. But what we've done is we've changed out some of the components in that kit. And one of the key features is a travel limiter that goes in the bottom of each fork leg. And what that travel limiter is designed to do is stop the fork before you ever get to the point of crushing a fender against a lower triple tree. Because most guys, when they put a 21 or 23 on, they spend the money on an aftermarket fender, have it custom painted or have it painted to match, or they relocate the stock fender. Well, everybody kind of loses train of thought there that, well, if I'm moving the fender up, you're shortening that gap between the top of the fender and the bottom of the lower triple tree. So you get that big bottom out event, and next thing you know, you got a big ding in the top of that fender.
Well,
and so that those travel limiters, the ones that we produce, there's a lot of cheap imitations out there, and guys are going as cheap and easy as putting a piece of rubber in the bottom of the fork to stop it. We actually, no different than any of our other stuff, we've machined a 6061 billet travel limiter. with the lower rod seat or the oil lock built into it. So the fork still retains the hydraulic bump stop.
Right.
So even though we're reestablishing the bottom out point 1 inch earlier or even more on a 23-inch kit, when that fork gets to that last inch of travel, it shuts the flow of oil off between the lower tube or the slider and the upper tube. So it still retains the hydraulic cushion. So it isn't a big metal bang at the end of the stroke. So,
well, I'd like to go back for a second. I mean, as you know, man, many of these upgrades and things that people are doing on bikes, they see it as a result of bikes that they've seen in magazines or at shows, right? So when, people, they craze of lowering your bike, that's actually, changing in suspension is actually the last thing that I try to do when somebody wants to lower a bike, because a lot of times people see these bikes in shows and magazines, they don't realize that sometimes modifications to have the form, the look, you have to give up something. There's compromises somewhere, either in quality of ride, lean angle, all those different things. So sometimes there are compromises. So, if someone, if it becomes a safety issue where someone physically has to be lower on the bike, we try to get them in thinner seats first, maybe lower profile tires, things like that to try to, try to fit them better on the bike. And we only lower it as a last resort. Now, what's your take on lowering the back end but not the front end? You see a lot of people put a 1 inch lower shock on the back, leave the front end stock length.
Yeah. So, just like you said, we're very function over fashion driven.
Right.
And so whenever we're suggesting suspension, we're always looking at keeping that, if we're going to bring the back down an inch, we're going to bring the front down an inch to match. Yeah, we got to keep that balance, because you'll get that random customer that has taken his own approach to it. And like you said, he'll take and lower the back end, but won't change anything on the front end. And then he calls and he says, man, I go down the road and the thing is shaking the handlebars in my hands, and it's doing weird stuff in the corners. Once you start getting into it, you start going, well, here's your issue. You've put more weight on the rear wheel. You've increased the rake angle, and by just a little bit, you've taken weight off the front tire. And next thing you know, you've taken a motorcycle that handled pretty decent and created a monster out of it because it doesn't handle.
Well, and let's talk big wheel stuff for a second. I love the fact that you guys made a 21, 23-inch specific cartridge setup, right? And I want to digress for a second. I think that that type of thing is grossly misunderstood, right? So people think that, the first thing that comes into mind is, okay, I'm going to put a bigger wheel on it. I've got to rake the front end. But a lot of people don't understand that rake is actually a result of trail. So I'll explain that for a second, and jump in, Eric, if you want to. So basically, trail it has to do with frame geometry, and it has to do with the front axle and the neck of the frame and the fork tubes and all those angles. I'm not going to get. It's a measurement. Okay, so typically it's that measurement, how long or short that trail number is relative, again, to neck and axle and all that, determines how the bike will handle. So if you look at a sport bike, for example, you'll have a super, super short trail on a sport bike. They tend to be very unstable at slow speeds. They're very stable at high speeds. So I think like a modern touring Harley is a 6.5-inch trail. And it has a certain characteristic to that balances out, from the speeds that bike is typically going to be ridden. So anytime you make, it's all geometry, guys. It's all angles, right? So anytime you make a change, even going from, say, a 16 to a 21-inch wheel, it's not uncommon for people just to leave the stock rake. You should really rake it about 4 degrees with the idea of maintaining trail as the bike was designed around that 6.5-inch trail. So you have to, you have to rake the front end. You have to offset the tree a little bit to get that trail number. So you'll notice if people, again, go from, say, a 16 to a 21, they don't do anything with Raker trail. the bike will feel very light on the front end at around 80 miles an hour, and the front end will feel very heavy at slow speeds and around a parking lot. And one way I tell people to check it is if you actually sit on the bike. Now, there's some bikes that are the exception, like you take a bike with a Sugar Bear front end on it or something like that. This really doesn't apply. Even some of Mondo's front ends. But if you're sitting on a bike and you take the handlebars and you go left to right and you see the tank bob up and down, then you know you've kind of got a trail issue there, and the front end's going to feel really heavy. Another way is if you're sitting on the bike and you just lean it over just a little and the handlebars slam to one side, then you have an issue with trail. Yep. So when you're seeing these bikes, these guys running 20, not 21's not that big of a deal, but you get into 23s, 26s, and they've even gotten bigger, 32s and way up there. People are making compromises, and often how they're modifying that front end, in many cases, they may only have that much travel on the front end. And, they have hard stops in the bottom of the front end and all of this stuff. So at least knowing that you guys have done your part to try to accommodate all of those factors and making a product specifically for that is really cool. So sorry to digress for a second.
No, and that's it's plenty fine, because we still get a lot of guys that ask about front end kits for, like you said, 26 and 30-inch wheel stuff. And like you said, quite honestly, the way that they're setting those front ends up, they maybe have half to 3/4 of an inch of travel, and they're hard stopping them. There's really no suspension gain to be had, just because there isn't enough travel to use there. So,
it's like trying to build a dual purpose motorcycle, right? You can't really carve a canyon in a bike that you can, but come on, you know what I mean? It's radical show bike versus a bike you're going to ride and enjoy and canyon carve with. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, truly. Okay. Truly. Yeah. And to go back to 21 and 23-inch wheels real quick, on our 23-inch applications, and this is, information for you as well as everyone listening. If anybody is out there that has a 23 or is potentially looking at adding a 23, and this is by no means a product plug, but just so you're aware of how we developed our front end. When we did all of our R&D with our shop road glide here, we set that up with the Nest 7 and 7 trees. And we know 100% confidently how well that worked. And so if, like you say, for future reference.
That's an absolute product plug. That front end works. I dig it. And the idea with this channel, Eric, is it's not product plugs and stuff. I mean, you guys didn't pay me to do this.
No.
But because there's no more shows anymore, hardly in this industry, and the general public doesn't have one-on-one time like this, right? Yeah. And then we stay so busy, we don't have time to spend 2 or 3 hours with a customer on the phone. So when the whole idea with this channel, man, is to showcase, tell people everything that's great about your stuff. And if there's other products, man, that are good, I don't mind talking about them. If they're not good, I don't talk about them. It's as good as that. So that's a good, right on. So sorry, digress a little bit there. So what are all the adjustments that are on those on your front ends? Same type of thing as a rear?
No, actually, our front end kits are specifically designed for just preload adjustment only.
Okay.
And to give you and the listeners out there an idea, so basically we've got a threaded preload adjuster on our cartridge. I wished I would have brought a cartridge in here. I wasn't too prepared this morning, evidently. I should have brought a whole bunch of product in with me, but basically you can see it on your thumb, right there by your thumb. There's the threaded, there you go. We call it a micrometer type preload adjuster. So basically it is a threaded adjustment on that shaft, and there's a set screw that locks the preload adjuster onto a flat on the shaft, but it is one of those, the reason that we selected that style adjustment is because it's a positive adjustment, and when you lock it down, your preload is not going to change, and I'm not going to throw it out there, but there's some manufacturers out there that use plastic pucks and, different sorts of preload adjusters. Well, that stuff it's fine up front, but we know how plastic and rubber react with oil. And so not to say that down the road that they may not slip and that adjustment may change on some of those other products like that. So that's why we selected that style adjuster. It's very simple in the regards that based on the spring preload chart that comes with the install guide, comes set out of the box from us for good for riders, or I should say good for riders up to 250 pounds.
Okay.
It
makes it easier to install, right? I mean, absolutely. Again, if you've removed the need to adjust it with the technology, and you can sell it out of the box and offer the one adjustment that's critical, then you're golden, right? It just makes it easier to deal with.
Yeah. So one of the most common questions that we get, and we've added some more verbiage and terminology into our install guides, is I weigh 255 pounds, or I weigh 245 pounds. And how do I set the preload? Because our weight, so basically go from 250 to 349, and then 350 to 449. And so what we always tell our customers, if you're on that threshold between adjustments, if you think you're an aggressive rider, or you're an aggressive rider, and you want that front end to ride a little bit tighter, and you're right on that threshold, then by all means, go to the next step up. But if you want comfort, keep it on the lesser of the two adjustments. And so we always, the easy way to say it is, do you want to ride like a Corvette, or do you want to ride like a Cadillac Eldorado? You know? And so if they say, I want it to ride like a Corvette, then, if you're 250 pounds, go one turn. If you want to ride like the Cadillac Eldorado, stay at 0. So,
gotcha.
But don't take passenger weight or luggage weight into consideration when making those front end adjustments.
That's an important point. Yeah.
Yeah. The passenger weight and the luggage weight is primarily being handled by the rear suspension, and really probably the most important time, or the only time that the passenger and luggage weight have any effect on the front end, is under hard braking, where it's trying to transfer all the weight from the rear to the front. But there's no adverse effects by, having that set at 0 turns of preload, even though you've got 500 pounds of rider, passenger, and luggage on there. And the reason that we say that is because that's a mistake that a lot of riders have made. They're like, I weigh 250, and then between my wife and my luggage and all that, we're 450. Well, they set the preload to 450. Well, when the guy's riding his motorcycle every day to work by himself, it's trying to knock his fillings out because the front end is sprung way too tight.
Right.
So always just take rider weight into consideration when setting preload on the front ends.
Oh, right on.
Let the rear shocks handle the rest.
I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Ron Coburn's asking, he says, I've never figured out why Harley runs a cartridge on the left fork and spring on right on the Ultras.
Right. We haven't either.
Yeah. Anyway.
And no different than the rear suspension. If you look at any of the newer bikes since 14, any of the Rushmore Edition bikes where they put the big heavy coil with the preload adjuster on the left shock, and then the right shock looks like it's off of a 1978 XR80.
Yeah, exactly.
Our theory and concept on everything we build is everything. If you buy a front end kit or you buy a set of rear shocks, they're identically matched, built, and we want both sides sharing the same amount of the load, doing the same amount of work, and creating and doing the same amount of the suspension function. So.
Well, look, I've traveled all over the planet, right? And I do these seminars and things, right, on fuel injection and engine building and stuff. And at the beginning, I always hear the mumbling and grumbling from people about, they're just, trashing Harley, right? And I say the same thing every time. If Harley Davidson built a perfect motorcycle, we wouldn't be in this business. There wouldn't be any room for the aftermarket. So, I believe, they provide a product how they see fit. We have an opportunity to make that product significantly better. So,
amen.
Keep doing it exactly the way you keep doing it, boys. Put marshmallows in the front end for all I care.
we concur.
We'll just make it better. I have one other question. Asking me to ask you about the new Softail Revo A shocks for 99 to 17 Softail.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm waiting to see if he's exactly what he wants to know. Oh, what? I guess you have them.
We do.
Is there something new or innovative about them or anything? Something new?
So we released our new Revo A coilovers for and basically 2000 to 2017 Softails is the model year fitment range on those. Fits all those Softails, but basically it's a brand new design as far as we offer a standard or a heavy duty rate spring for those applications, depending on rider, passenger, combined weights, also rebound adjustable. We've kept that one a little more simple in regards to, instead of having a bunch of ranges of adjustment on rebound, basically it's a 3-position rebound adjuster. And yeah, I'll tell you what, for guys that are out there still riding Softails and still loving their old, 2005 Fat Boy or whatever, it's a product that absolutely is life changing on those older Softails. And the thing is, let's face it, there's a guy can pick up a nice used Softail, pretty cheap.
Right.
And if a guy wanted to build just a nice economy cruiser to ride back and forth to the office every day or whatever, son of a gun. And like I say, to go along with that, we developed a front end kit to go with those for the FLST models for 2000 to 2017 as well. So no different than the bagger stuff now. You could take an older $5,000 Softail and really have some fun with it and make that thing ride and handle like crazy.
Man, I've got a shop full of that. We've got people, they're pulling these bikes out of the weeds. Right. And, you can either buy them super dirt cheap or they're looking at the cost of a new one. And we're doing full mechanical restorations on these things, but upgrading to better than what they would have if new. And, a guy can put a few $1,000s in one and have a really, really awesome bike, because that old stuff's pretty great too. No question. Anthony says he just bought a 2000 Softail for $2,800. And he's getting ready to do the forks on it. Awesome. So, is there anything that you would like to add? I know I've asked a bunch of questions. Did you have anything in mind that you want to cover before we bounce out of here?
Well, and probably the one product that we haven't really touched on is our air rides. And quite honestly, going back to the opening intro, talking about that. That's really where the company started. And so when people will ask about our air rides and what the history is on our air ride systems, quite honestly, we're kind of the granddaddies of the motorcycle air rides. Right. And there's a lot of little things that we've talked about over this conversation, that everything that I've told you about, our standard Revo and Revo A's, all of our coilovers have really evolved from the evolution of the air ride. And so to go into that just a little bit, and without getting too deep in the weeds, one of the quick questions that we get quite often is for ride comfort, or I've got a certain thing in mind is what I want to do with this air ride. We had talked about function over fashion. And so all of our air rides, hands down, are still and have always been designed and intended for functionality. to give riders the best ride quality that they can put on their motorcycle. Of course, and I always tell guys there's about 3 to 4 real circumstances where that air ride is critical, and it is maybe the best choice for them. You've always got the rider that is short-legged, that needs confidence, stoplight to stoplight, and needs maybe just the comfort and the confidence to be able to back their bike into a parking spot in front of the dealership and not feel like they have to have their wife get off the bike and push them backwards. So the short rider is number one. The second one, of course, is you've got the guy that he wants to profile, pull up in front of his local pub or bike night, air the system down, park the bike. It gives it that low, lean look and slams it, of course. And then, of course, the third situation is you've got a guy that rides 50% of the time solo and the other half with his wife, and he's pulling a trailer or something like that, and wants that ease of adjustability to take and, make that adjustment between solo and 2-up on the weekends and not have to pull the saddlebags off and adjust springs and such. And so that the air ride is really, really nice in any one of those aspects. But the thing that we always go back to, no different than setting our springs on our coil shocks, is making sure that you set the suspension correctly on those. Everybody has a preconceived notion. I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have this preconceived notion that the less air you put in the system, the softer it's going to ride. But quite honestly, when we get customers that have put an air ride on and they're like, man, I've just spent this money on an air ride and I would have really thought it would ride better. And you start talking to them about how they've set the suspension or how much pressure they're running. 9 times out of 10 guys aren't running enough air pressure in them. And so we always recommend putting a gauge on the bike just so they have once they find their sweet spot, they can return to that sweet spot, or, maybe going between solo and 2-up, they can take and go, all right, I know I'm running this PSI riding by myself. And when I put my wife or girlfriend on the bike, I'm at this, at this pressure. So that is huge. Just because once guys really get that air ride dialed in, like I say, it is purely, in our eyes, it's we've created it for functionality and comfort. And so, give you that 2 cents.
So the bottom line is, a guy choosing between a coil spring shock and air ride, it's basically how often and how broad of an operating range is he going to have on the bike? Like you mentioned, trailer this, that, versus maybe an adjustment every now and then kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, truly. And then no different than our Revo and Revo A, we offer our air rides in an air or an air A version for the baggers and basically everything other than the soft tails. The soft tails don't have a rebound adjustable damper, but it really does boil down to how often a rider needs to make adjustments. If you're a set it and forget it kind of guy, the coils are probably the right answer.
Gotcha. Well, Anthony says that he is glad that he's not the only one that rides with his wife or his girlfriend.
Just don't get caught.
Just don't get caught, baby. I'm not telling anybody. All right. Anything else, man? I can't thank you enough for hopping in here with us.
Yeah. Anything
else you want to tell us, or?
I'll tell you what. We could talk all day about suspensions. I mean, this is what I do, and so if there's any questions that you have, or if any of the listeners out there, the viewers, have any questions, I mean, I'd sure entertain those. But
awesome. Well, I think the questions have pretty much run out, Eric.
Okay.
Man, we can have a beverage and enjoy our weekend. I'm going to finish dialing in a carburetor on a 36 Ford, I think. Right?
All right. Yeah. I'm going to go paint a house.
Go paint a house, man. Hey, dude, I can't.
Yours sounds way more fun than mine.
It is. It probably is. Oh, man, I can't thank you enough for jumping on board here and talking to all these folks.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us on.
You got it, my friend. Well, have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Guys, thanks a million for coming in and watching. I hope you have enjoyed this. Meant a lot to have Eric come in with us for about an hour or so. It's pretty cool. So don't forget, you can hop on our website, and I'll put a link in the description below. And then after this video cycles and does its thing through YouTube, you'll see a link to the website as well. And but anyway, there's one on the description down below if you want to browse everything that that Legends has to offer on our website. And if you'd like to get yours, order them from us, guys. We would appreciate it. Thanks again to all of our members for supporting the channel, and we hope all of you have the rest of your weekend is fantastic. So take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good one.